Hello. Today we're going to cover section 1.2, functions. Let's talk about function notation and do problem number 7 and problem number 8. First of all, what does it mean, function notation? Notate. The way we write something. A function notation can show us the relationship between the input and the output. The notation y equals f of x defines a function. The x is the input value, and f of x represents the output value. Notice the y, the output, can be notated or written as f of x. This is called function notation. Just remember, the f of x doesn't mean multiply f times x. It's a function notation. Hey, what is your output, f of x, when I input x? Let's try some practice problems. Look at number 7. For each equation, write in the function notation and find f of 2. Okay, so how do I switch this to function notation? You just change the y for f of x. F of x equals 6 over x minus 3. Now find f of 2. F of 2 means plugging in 2 for the x value. Always plug in those parentheses. And then you can combine to figure that out. So 2 minus 3 is -1. So that means f of 2 equals 6 over -1. So -6. When I plug in 2, the output is -6. Let's look at B. F of x equals -3x plus 5 over 2. So let's find f of 2. Once again, you're just plugging in 2 for the x value. -3 times 2 is a -6. -6 plus 5 is a -1. So we see that f of 2 is -1 in the numerator and 2 in the denominator, so -1/2. When I plug in 2, the corresponding output is -1/2. Let's do it one more time. F of x, change the y to f of x. Function notation. That's it. Equals 3x minus 2. Now find f of 2 by plugging in 2 for the x value. These three examples only have one x, but we could have multiple x's that we need to plug into, so just be aware of that. Now I evaluate. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 minus 2 is 4. So I can see that f of 2 is 4. When I plug in 2, the corresponding output is 4. Let's try problem number 8. Determine the domain and find f of -3, or g of -3, or h of -3, depending on what your function letter is. What is the domain? Look at this function. What can I input and keep the statement true? Can I input negative numbers? Sure. Can I input 0? Sure. Can I input positive numbers? Sure. So here the domain would be anything from -infinity to infinity. Now let's find f of -3, but we're going to say g of -3 just to keep the letters the same. All right, let's plug in -3 and evaluate. -3 squared is 9. Remember, you always plug in parentheses. So that -3 needs to be in those parentheses because it produces a positive 9. Remember, if there's no parentheses, that would be a -9, and that might be confusing. So always plug in parentheses. So positive 9 times 2 is 18, plus 5 is 23. So g of -3 equals 23. When I plug in a -3 to the g function, the output is 23. Let's look at h of x. What do I remember about the x being in the denominator? Oh yeah, it cannot equal 0. So how do I figure out the domain? I make sure that the denominator is not equal to 0. So if 2x does not equal 0, and I divide both sides by 2, this means that x cannot be 0. How do I state that as the domain? In interval notation, x cannot be 0. Remember, if you need to look at a little graph to help you, you can. Here's 0. It cannot be 0, but we could put anything over here in and anything over here in. All of those will make the statement true. So I go from negative infinity to 0, parentheses, union, 0 to infinity. There are two intervals there, so make sure your interval notation has two parts. Remember parentheses, we can't divide by 0, so we can't include it. All right, let's find h of negative 3. 1 over 2 times negative 3. So h of negative 3 equals 1 over 2 times negative 3. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. So h of negative 3 is equal to 1 over negative 6. Now, we usually write that negative out front. So I would say negative 1/6. Let's look at C. First, state the domain. The domain means what can I input to make the statement true? So what can I input? Can I input a negative number? Can I input 0? Can I input a positive number and still have the statement be true? Sure. Now, absolute value is not the same as a square root that we looked at earlier. Absolute values, you can input whatever you want. The output needs to be positive, right? But I can input anything I want, and the domain talks about input. Since I can input anything I want, the domain is all real numbers, negative infinity to infinity. Now let's find f of negative 3. Okay, how do I evaluate this? So this would be negative 5 minus 3 times what's inside the absolute value. So go through your order of operations, negative 5 times negative 3, that would be a positive 15. So 15 minus 5 would be a positive 10. Once I've done all of that cleanup inside, then I can take it out of the absolute value, and this would just be times a positive 10. Then negative 3 times 10 is negative 30, and minus another 5 is negative 35. So f of negative 3 equals negative 35. When I input negative 3, I get out the corresponding y value of negative 35. Have a great day.